Welcome to Economic Historian.
What if the story of the United States didn't actually begin with freedom? What if it began with something far more calculated, a global race for power, wealth, and control? Long before America existed, the world was already being shaped by empires that believed expansion was survival. Across Europe, nations competed relentlessly, pushing beyond their borders in search of resources, trade routes, and dominance. And when they looked west, across a vast, unpredictable ocean, they didn't see a future nation. They saw an opportunity, a land filled with untapped wealth, waiting to be claimed. When the British established colonies in North America, the goal wasn't independence, it was extraction. These settlements were extensions of an empire, designed to produce, to trade, and most importantly, to generate profit. Tobacco, timber, cotton, everything flowed in one direction, back to Britain. And for a time, the system worked. But systems don't stay stable forever. Because over time, something subtle began to change. The people living in these colonies were no longer just distant subjects of a king. They were building lives, communities, and identities of their own. And slowly, almost invisibly, a new idea started forming. Not British, but American. At first, the tension was small, a tax here, a regulation there. But after Britain emerged from costly wars, it needed money, and the colonies became the easiest target. Taxes increased, control tightened, and frustration grew. But this wasn't just about money, it was about power. When people began to question why they were being taxed without having a voice, something shifted. This wasn't just resistance anymore, it was the beginning of defiance. And then, one night, in the quiet darkness of a harbor, that defiance turned into action. Crates of tea were thrown into the water, not just as protest, but as a message. Things would never be the same again. What followed wasn't immediate independence, it was escalation. Meetings turned into movements, words turned into plans, and eventually a radical idea took hold. What if they broke away completely? What if they challenged the most powerful empire on earth? It sounded impossible, and in many ways, it was. The colonies were weaker, less organized, poorly equipped, but they had something that couldn't be measured in numbers: belief. What began as resistance turned into revolution. War spread across the land. Battles were fought not just with weapons, but with endurance. Harsh winters, limited supplies, constant uncertainty. And yet, against all expectations, they survived, and then they won. But victory didn't solve everything. In fact, it created a new problem, one far more difficult. How do you build a nation from nothing? There was no blueprint, no perfect system to copy, only ideas, some bold, some uncertain. The leaders of this new country understood one thing clearly: they didn't want another king, but they also feared chaos. So they designed something different, a system built on balance, power divided, authority limited. It was innovative, revolutionary, but also fragile, because the more complex a system becomes, the more ways it can fail. Still, the country began to grow. Land stretched endlessly to the west. Opportunities seemed unlimited. People arrived from all over the world, chasing something new, something better. And as the population grew, so did ambition. Industries emerged. Machines replaced manual labor. Cities expanded rapidly. Wealth began to accumulate at a scale never seen before. But here's where the pattern quietly begins. Growth wasn't equal. While some built vast fortunes, others struggled just to survive. Long hours, harsh conditions, minimal pay. And yet, the system kept moving forward, because on the surface everything looked like progress. But underneath, a deeper conflict was forming, because even as America spoke of freedom, it continued to allow slavery, not as a small exception, but as a major part of its economy. Entire regions depended on it. Entire industries relied on it. Two completely different systems, existing inside one nation. And systems like that don't stay stable. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great. And when it does, it breaks. The Civil War wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. Years of tension, disagreement, and imbalance finally erupted into violence. It wasn't just a war of territory, it was a war of identity. What kind of nation would this be? The cost was devastating. Families divided, cities destroyed, lives lost on a massive scale. For a moment, it seemed like the country might not survive at all. But in the end, it did. The Union remained intact. Slavery was abolished. And once again, America entered a new phase, rebuilding, but also accelerating. Because after the war, growth didn't just return, it exploded. Railroads connected vast distances. Factories multiplied. Innovation surged forward. Names like industrial giants began to dominate the economy. Wealth reached unimaginable levels. And once again, the same pattern appeared. Extreme success paired with extreme inequality. But this time, the scale was even bigger. Then came the 20th century, and with it, global conflict. World wars reshaped the entire planet. But while much of the world was devastated, the United States emerged stronger, more powerful, more influential. By the end of World War II, America wasn't just another country, it was the center of the global system. Its currency became the foundation of international trade. Its economy influenced the world. Its military presence extended across continents. This was the peak, the moment every empire eventually reaches. But here's what history teaches us. Peaks don't last forever. Because after the 1970s, something began to shift again. Quietly, gradually. Production started moving elsewhere. Industries changed. The nature of the economy evolved. Instead of building things, the system began focusing on finance. Money was no longer just earned, it was created, expanded, leveraged. And for a while it worked. Growth continued, markets rose, wealth increased. But beneath the surface, the foundation was changing. Debt started rising, inequality widened, complexity increased. And when systems become too complex, they become harder to control. Then came moments that exposed the cracks. Financial crises, economic instability, growing division, each one treated as temporary, each one patched with solutions that worked just enough, but never completely. Because the deeper issues remained, and this is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every major empire in history follows a similar path. Rapid growth, global dominance, increasing complexity, rising inequality, debt accumulation, internal division. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, then all at once. And today, the United States stands in a position that feels familiar, not just in its power, but in its challenges. Debt at historic levels, political division intensifying, global competition rising, trust in institutions declining. Individually, these may seem like separate issues, but together, they form a pattern that history has seen before. This doesn't mean collapse is certain, but it does raise an important question. Is this just another phase of evolution, or the beginning of something deeper? Because throughout history, one thing remains consistent. The greatest risks are rarely obvious in the moment. They build quietly, gradually, until they reach a point where change is no longer optional, only unavoidable. And by the time most people recognize it, it's already too late to reverse. So the real question isn't whether history will repeat itself. It's whether we are aware enough to see the pattern before it completes. Because the story of the United States isn't just about the past. It's about a system still unfolding, still evolving, still balancing between strength and fragility. And what happens next may not just define one nation, but the future of the entire world.
If you enjoy learning from Economic Historian, don't forget to subscribe and be part of the journey.